Today we are reading Bamidbar Chapter 7. As is well known, this chapter is a very long chapter in text, but the content seems to be not very long because it's mostly repetitive. It mostly divides into two major parts. So the story of this chapter, to return to our structure of the narrative, is the final part, which is really missing in some sense from the previous narratives, mostly in Sefer Vayikra, of the Chanukah, the dedication of the Mishkan. We had 3 different times we've discussed the specific processes of the dedication of the Mishkan in Sefer Shemois, and in the mitzvah, and then the action of the mitzvah in Sefer Vayikra. We had the karbonos called the Leviyim, which sanctified the Mishkan by that. We had in Sefer Shemois before that the finishing the building of the Mishkan. And now in Sefer Bamidbar we have the gifts, or the specific karbonos, structured as gifts, given not by Moshe and the Leviyim, but by the Nesiim of all the other tribes, which the gifts that they brought for the celebration, we call this more of the celebration of the dedication of the Mishkan. And that's the final part of the dedication of the Mishkan, which is said here. So it belongs to this, finishing this narrative of the dedication of the Mishkan, to which, in a certain sense, all of the census and all of the appointments and all of the mitzvahs that we've discussed here are appended. And we could also see very nicely that this matches with my thesis that I've been working with all of this time, that the Sefer Bamidbar specifically discusses how the Mishkan and its Kedusha spreads out throughout all the camp, throughout all the tribes. So just like we had the laws that belong to the Kohanim in Sefer Vayikra, and the laws belonging more to the organization of the Machna around them in Sefer Bamidbar. In the same way we'll have, and the next chapter, the dedication of the Leviyim, which is again more outer level, so to speak, of the Kohanim. In the same way, the dedication of the Mishkan, the karbonos that brought for that sanctification and dedication belonging to the Kohanim was in Sefer Vayikra, and the karbonos brought by the Nesiim of the rest of the tribes to celebrate the dedication of the Mishkan are in Sefer Bamidbar, which matches to this theory at Sefer Bamidbar, discussing how all the other tribes are also organized surrounding the Mishkan. Now there were 2 different kinds of gifts that the Nesiim of the rest of the tribes brought, and we'll read them. So the first story starts, Vahi b'yom kales Moshe Elokim es HaMishkan vayimshech oisai vaykadesh oisai, and goes on, v'eskal kelev v'mezbech v'eskal kelev. In other words, in the day that Moshe finished setting up the Mishkan, so this is really brings us all the way back to the end of Sefer Shemois, which is where it describes the setting up, the hakama of the Mishkan, and it's sort of not saying Vahi b'yom hekrev haranes hamiluim, right? It's the day that the Mishkan was set up. Of course, that's the same day in which the Miluim happened, but this is referring all the way back to that. The Nesiya Yisrael, Roshei Beis Avoisam, brought. And the pasuk says, these are also the Nesiya Matit, these are also Ha'im D'Ma'al HaPekudim. So it's connecting us to the senses that we had here. We see that these Nesiyim, their job is both to be Nesiya HaMatos, all of the appointments, all of the management of the Matis is their job. And they're also the ones appointed on the census, Ha'im D'Ma'al HaPekudim. Now they bring a carbon. What do they bring? And they bring a combined carbon altogether. 6 carriages, Egles Tzav, so carriages which have Tzav, nobody knows exactly what it means, but some kind of good carriages, and 12 Bukar. 12 Bukar just means cattle, but apparently here I would assume it means oxen. And as the pasuk explains, so this means that each two Nesiim bring 1 carriage, and each one bring 1 shoyer, as it says 1 ox. So that's how I know that Bukar is 1 ox. And they bring it. And now, as all the stories here, they have an explicit command that it should work. So Hashem tells Moshe, take it, and it will be given for the work of the Oil Moed. You will give it to the Leviyim, each according to his work. In other words, it seems like it wasn't simple. Should I accept it? Remember all the gifts given here, all the way back to Parshas Truma. Parsha of this week happens to be. There was a specific command for every kind of thing to be brought. Here, the Nesiim, they just thought of something themselves to bring. So how does it work? How does it get authorized? So Hashem explicitly given authorization to this. And therefore Moshe follows the command, he takes it and gives it to the Leviyim. Now this is the gift not to the building of the Mishkan, but to the carrying of the Mishkan. So it's very interesting if we think about the hierarchy here, so we have the building of the Mishkan and all of it, things that belong to it, the avodah that belongs to the Kohanim. Then we have the Leviyim, whose job includes the carrying of the Mishkan, right? Now, after that, we have the Nesiim bringing gifts to the Leviyim, so to speak, to help them with their carrying of the Mishkan. So that's how all the Nesiim are participating in the Mishkan, also specifically in this carrying of the Mishkan, which is like one step before their place, so to speak. And that's what they do. And Moshe distributes the carriages to the Leviyim according to need, right? So he gives 2 carriages to Vnei Gershon. They carry, as we've seen earlier, the lighter things, the fabrics and things like that. And 4 carriages, which each with 2 axes to carry it. So 8 Bokar, he gives to Merari, who carry the Kroshim, all the heavier parts of the Mishkan, led by a Sameh Kahas. The third one don't get because they carry the internal vessels of Avodas HaKodesh, and that is carried, as we've studied before, because if it's carried on the shoulder, it's not carried on oxen. So part of the honor of the Mishkan is that the most important parts are not carried by these carriages, they're carried by humans. Maybe there's also like a basic protection in this, they could break, they're fragile, so we don't put them on the carriages, but also it's a question of respect. So they're not carried by animals, they're carried by humans. So that's the first gift, and as we said, the gift of the Nesiim to the avodah of the Leviyim. Now, there's a gift that they bring for the Mishkan itself, and also this gift, it's described in the same way. The Nesiim bring it, and then Hashem has to authorize Moshe to accept it, and he also gives them the way to distribute it. So these same 2 things, the same exact structure, is for both of these gifts. It says the Nesiim bring the Chanukas HaMizbech. If you read the story, for example, of Shlomo, and also later in Shani, how they celebrated the dedication of the temple, you'll remember that part of it is bringing a lot of kabbanas. So those kabbanas are not the meluim, right? It's not a question of the meluim are the kabbanas, that specifically their tafkid, their function is to sanctify the mikdash and so on. These are kabbanas that are not sanctificatory, they're not ones that are being mekadesh the Mishkan, like connected to the Mashiach and all of that. They're ones that are celebrating the grand opening of the Mishkan. And Hashem tells Moshe, you should accept it, and you should let one Nasi bring his kabbalas every day. So they're spreading out the celebration to many days by giving each Nasi one day to bring his celebratory kabbalas. And here we have the very lengthy recounting of their kabbalas. Each day, again, they all bring the same exact carbon, and we describe each day which Nasi brought it, and what his carbon was, and each one of them has repeated the same thing, and I'm pretty sure that this is meant to be a celebratory thing to read, and we see that we read it on Hanukkah every year, on the days of Hanukkah, although there's only 8 days of Hanukkah, there should have been 12 days according to this, but there's only 8 days of Hanukkah, and we somehow push that in. The last day we read 5, so we should push it all in, but we read each day, and I'm pretty sure that this is the meaning of it being written, so just as the celebration was spread out into 10 days to make the celebration bigger, right? It's not like the Mishkan is very hungry, it needs all this karbonas, so we're bringing all of these, just so it should exist. No, it was explicitly spread out in order to make the celebration longer, in order to make it bigger by it being spread out. In the same way, it's explicitly spread out the recounting of it in the text, so that it's more celebratory, it's nicer. When a person is happy, that's another thing. We're starting the Chodesh Odeh today. When a person is happy, he tends to speak at length. That's one of the attributes of happiness. When a person is sad, he tends to be silent. So even if he speaks, he would speak very silently or very shortly, like very elliptically. When a person is happy, he speaks a lot. That's why we can see the Megillah Esther has the longest style in Tanakh, because it's meant to be read when people are very happy. And therefore it's made in that way. In the same way, when the Torah is very happy, it's trying to express the happiness, the great simcha of the Chanukas HaMizbech, it repeats the same thing 12 times, because it's not like we have to go anywhere, it's not like we have to make it shorter, because like we're slaves, because like we're stuck. No, we're all happy, and we can do everything again and again, and therefore I cannot read every time the same thing again 12 times. We can read that in the Torah when it's time to do that in the Parsha, but I can tell you each day who the Nasi was, and for the first one I will tell you what his carbon was. So the first day, the Makriv, the carbon was Nachshon ben Nadav, the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda, and this carbon was like this. So the carbon is always divided into these three parts, we could say. So this first is a mincha. Now the mincha is brought in beautiful dishes. So he brings a mincha in a silver dish, a silver ka'ara, along with a mizrak, some like kind of dish or some kind of utensil which we spray the blood with, or some other things. Also gold. Now it gives the amounts, it gives the weights for these, right? The ka'ara weighs 130 shekel. The shekel is a weight, right? The mizrak weighs 70 shekel, and both of these come along first with furl of soles for a mincha. So that's a normal way. When you bring a mincha, you're bringing a kli. They donated both the mincha and the kli, and also a kaf. Now that's number one. Also, besides that, they bring a kaf, again weighing 10 something of gold, 10 shkolim of gold, full of ketoires. And then there's karbonas. They bring oila, chatas, and shlomim as the three kinds of main karbonas. So they bring a par for oila, a par and aisle for oila, a soid for chatas, as most chatas tzibur are, at least, and also chatas yochid. And for shlomim, they bring a big shlomim. So they bring tobaka, 5 ailem, 5 atudim, and 5 kvasim. That's the great shlomim, because shlomim is the big celebration, the party, as we always discussed. There's a lot of those. That's the carbon of Nachshon. And the second day, Nisan el ben Suad, the Nusav Yisachar. Yisachar does the same thing. On the third day, Eliav ben Chaylan, the Nusav of Zevulun. On the fourth day, Elitzer ben Sheded, the Nusav of Reuven. On the fifth day, Shlemuel ben Surishadai, the Nusav of Shimon. On the sixth day, Yosef ben Deuel, the Nusav of God. On the seventh day, Lishama ben Amiud, the Nasi of Ephraim. On the eighth day, Gamliel ben Pedussi, the Nasi of Menashe. On the ninth day, Avidam ben Gedoini, the Nasi of Binyamin. On the 10th day, Achiezer ben Amishad, the Nasi of Dan. On the 11th day, Pagiel ben Achan, the Nasi of Osher. On the 12th day, Achira ben Einan, the Nasi of Naphtali. And then we have the final recount, the final march, so to speak, of this whole celebration, is it gives us total tally of all of these gifts, and it gives us Zois Chanukah Mizbech. So in total, this is how much was donated to the Mizbech, to the dedication of the Mizbech, and the day that it was Nimshach, and the day that it was anointed with oil from the Nesiim. And it turns out, in total, they all had together 12 plates, 12 trays of silver, 12 mizrakim of silver, 12 gold spoons. Each one is 130. Each now, if you think about the silver, now we could count how much silver and how much gold we got. Each silver kara was 130. Each mizrak was 70. Altogether, 2,400 shkolim was donated along all this time. The 12 kappas turns out to be, since each is worth 10 gold, or weighs 10 gold, so it's total 120. So since they each brought one bukar for oila, turns out to be 12 pudim for oila. Since they each brought one aisle for oila, we have 12 ailem. Since they each brought one keves for oila, they have 12 kvasim. Since they each brought one soy for achatas, we have 12 seirem. Since they each brought 2 pudim for a shlomim, we have 24 pudim. Since they each brought how many ailem? 5 ailem for the Shlomo, we have 60 ailem. Since they each brought 5 atudim, we have 60 atudim. Since they each brought 5 kvasim, we have 60 kvasim. That's 12 times 5. That's the total. That's what the Mizbeach had for its dedication. And now the final end. This is really, there's something very similar in the end of Sefer Shemos. And this teaches us that this is explicitly meant to be the end of this part of the story, the end of the story, which finishes with Moshe entering into the Mishkan after it was finished. So after it was finished, in Sefer Shemos, he had something like this, and after it's finished Sefer Vayikra, we did not entirely have something like this. We had something similar or close to similar to this in Parshas Shemini Achra. And now we have, in the final finishing of it, we have, and Moshe came to the Almoed, and he hears the voice speaking to him from on top of the Kapoiras, which is on the Urim, between the two Keruvim, it speaks to him. So that's, as we've started in the beginning of Parshas Truma, the whole point of this is, and here that promise is fulfilled. Hashem speaks to Moshe me'al hakaporos. We had that, as we said in the beginning of Shemos, at one version of the end, and now in the second or the third or final version of the end, we have the same thing telling us that after all this was done, Moshe had heard the voice speaking to him from between the two Keruvim. Maybe we can understand this is also as, if there's like two versions or two stories of this voice, we could understand this as something like, this is the voice also, because all of the Mishkan, all the Avodah, all of the setting up, this sort of creates the space or the ability to hear the voice. In the same way, if we include all the Nesiim into the Chanukah Mishkan, so in some sense, that means that the voice is also includes all of that.